We tested 5 of the best audio interfaces available on the market today to see if there's really that much difference between them. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which interface is for you. We're going to go through all of the features, break down the pros, the cons, the performance to price ratio, and help you decide which interface to buy. Quick disclaimer, this video is not sponsored. We haven't been paid to do these reviews. However, Apogee and SSL did actually provide these interfaces on loan so that we could test them. All of the other interfaces were purchased by Chris. So I'm going to hand you over to Chris Georgiou now. He's a professional producer from here in the UK, and he's going to break down each of these interfaces.
So let's start off with the Scarlett 2i2. Now this is a renowned audio interface by Focusrite, and it is for the artist. Even on the box itself, it says for the artist. So this is really easy to use because it's beginner friendly, it's simple, there's not much that you need to do here aside from plug it in and set it up in terms of your inputs and outputs and your routing in your DAW to get this working. So let's look at the hardware and how to use the Scarlett 2i2. So let's have a look at the Scarlett 2i2 in terms of its hardware, its buttons and the knobs that are available here for us to work with. So we've got our input and output here, and then we've got it labeled as such, and then we have got this, which is our gain. So we can adjust this left and right so that we can get the appropriate amount of gain here. And then to this side here, we've got our headphone output. We have this option to have direct monitoring, which is a more recent feature of the more modern Scarlett 2i2s. And then we have our output, which will be for our monitors. We've got our phantom power here, 48 volts, to support certain microphones like large diaphragm condensers, typically used for vocals, which need phantom power in order to work. And what's really helpful for people that are less experienced in the recording process is this auto safe and air here. So we can have auto leveling, so you can press that, and then if you, for instance, were to sing and go through this, it will set the appropriate gain coming in so that you're getting an optimal amount and not too much, not too little. And then we also have safe, which prevents any clipping, which is the telltale sign of too much signal coming through an interface, and then it starts to distort and create these nasty artifacts. And then we have air, which adds a little bit more brilliance and brightness and sheen overall. So it is the equivalent of actually running through some form of saturation or excitement or EQ with kind of analog emulation software. So let's have a look at the back as well. So on the back here, we can see the USB to the bottom left, and then we have our right and left outputs, and then we have our inputs here for an XLR. So we can plug in our microphones like so, and then we have our right left outputs for our monitors, and then we can adjust the level of our outputs with the large knob on the other side. So let's move into the SSL 2 Plus Mark II. Now SSL is world renowned for having some of the most iconic mixing desks as well as channel strips that have been used on some of the most iconic records of all time. So this is a relatively affordable option and still has the signature sound of the SSL. So let's dive into the hardware and we can talk a little bit more about how you can use this. So let's take a look at the SSL 2 Plus Mark II here. So the concepts here are the same in terms of the inputs and outputs. So we have our channel 1, we've got our channel 2, we've got our phantom power, we've got our line level, and then we also have a low pass filter here. And then we have got our gain that we can adjust coming in here. And then we have this really fun button, which is 4K. So we can impart the character of the legendary 4K channel strip here from SSL. We've got the same here for our second channel. Then we have our monitor here that we can turn up and down for our monitors. And then what I really love, particularly about this interface, is that we have 2 headphone outputs here, and we plug them in like so. We'll look at these and the back in a second, and we have the ability to set and adjust the volume for each of our headphones, which is great here. And here we have a blend between our input and our USB here. So very simple, very intuitive, again, very beginner friendly, which I love. So let's have a look at the front and back of this. So on the front here, we just have our instrument in and out, and then we have our headphone outputs as well. And then on the back here, you can see that we have our inputs for XLR here. We've got input 1 and 2, and then we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 outputs here. And then we also have an in and out for MIDI. And then we have our USB-C to connect to our computer. Next up, we have the Apogee Duet 3. Now, the Apogee Duet is known for its incredible sound quality. It is professional and it also is pretty aesthetically pleasing because of its sleek design. Now, most people accept that this is one of the more premium options when you're looking for interfaces. So let's dive into the hardware itself as well as the software that comes with it. So let's have a look at the Apogee Duet 3. So we have a very sleek and minimal interface here. So we have got our speaker, our headphones, then we have got our input 1, our input 2, our effects 1, and our effects 2. And we will look at the effects section in the software that accompanies the hardware. And essentially what that is the effects chain that you want to monitor or record through. And when that is on, you will see a light, much like the headphone here, so that you know that either effects 1 or effects 2 is actually on and you are printing through it. And to cycle between these, you simply just press like so. So input 1, input 2, and then we have speakers, and that is just showing us the volume of our speakers and then the volume of our headphones like so. And the main difference here between any other interface that we're going to be covering is that this has this docking station here. So you can take this out, you can actually pull this out, which I will do in just a second, like so. So I've pulled this out and you have the headphone out here. And then this is how you can actually connect to the docking station here. So this is super easy to transport. It's very lightweight. And then we have our docking station where we can simply click that back in, and then we have our inputs and outputs as well as our connector to our computer. So if we look at the Duet dock, you can see we have our headphone out to the left. We've got our inputs for our XLRs, and then we have our inputs for our instruments as well as our left and right for our speakers. And then we have our USB-C connector here to our computer. So let's talk through the Apogee Control 2 here. So we have the software here that is accompanying the hardware that you're going to run through before you get into your DAW. So we've got input 1 and input 2, and then we have effects here. So these are the effects that you can print to. So to bring it up, you have this here. We have the option to A and B different settings if we want to play around here. We've got some presets at the bottom, and then we essentially just have an EQ that you can turn on and off. And then we have a high cut here, so we can cut up to 300 Hertz. We can boost a low shelf here or cut a low shelf. You can choose a Q, so a narrow or a broader Q here, so a bell or a notch essentially. And then we have our mid peak, so between 250 and 8K we can boost. And then we have a high shelf that we can boost as well. We have a drive here, which is going to add some saturation. We've got an output level, and then on the bottom here we have our dynamics section. So this is our threshold, we've got our ratio, and then we have our blend, so we can do parallel dynamics processing or we can do completely wet dynamics processing, so 100% of the signal is going through the compressor. And then we've got our gain reduction meter here, and then we can choose if we want compression going through EQ or EQ going through compression, and that will just affect the overall chain itself. So that is really kind of the simple breakdown of what you're doing here. You're essentially going to record through this, and you can bring this up. So, you know, if you're working with a singer or you're trying to monitor it yourself, you can bring the volume of this up, which isn't going to affect the gain going in. The gain is going to be totally fine. So I have a microphone here that I'm just going to hold onto as I speak, and let's turn on our phantom power here. Let's bring the gain down of the microphone here, and you can see that this is coming up and down, and I'm just adjusting the gain coming in with the round knob here that we can control. And then I can dial in compression. If I wanted to dial in compression, you can see that it's starting to add some gain reduction here. I can do it 100%. I can do 3 to 1, so it's less aggressive here. And then we can adjust our output level, drive, EQ to taste. I can either choose to print that or not. And then we have our output here, our headphones, our speakers. Now, I'm not going to dive into absolutely every single knob and button here. You can totally dive into this yourself and dive into the manual if you really want to get more of a sense for what you can do here. But that is the simple kind of overview of this, and most software that accompanies audio interfaces is kind of a similar setup here. So now I want to talk about the UAD Volt, and this is the entry level that UAD has more recently rolled out. So you get the option of having a little bit, a taster of the UAD sound in a relatively easy to use and minimal audio interface setup. So let's have a look at the hardware itself and some practical applications here. So let's have a look at the Volt 176. So this is the only interface out of the others that we have looked at that only has one input. So all of the others have 2 inputs. This only has 1. So you are limited to only being able to record one source at a time. And we have the gain here for the input. We have our monitor. We have the option for direct monitoring here. And we have a couple of options here. We have a 76 compressor and we have vintage. Now this isn't actually on right now, but you can cycle by pressing this to go through each one of these, and you have 1176 style compression that is going to be recorded in. So within the hardware itself, there is some compression, and that can kick in if you tell it to. So on the front here, we've got our 48 volts, we've got instrument, and depending on the input type, you're either going to have that on or off. You have the volume for your headphones, and then you have the headphone output here. And on the back here, we actually have a power on off. We have a 5 volt wire that we have to plug in. We have our USB-C port. We have a MIDI out and in, and we have our monitor left and right for our speakers. So it's important to mention that we actually have to plug this in to 2 USB ports here. So the 5 volt DC plugs into your computer, and you have to turn the power switch on as well as have your USB-C plugged in. So this will take up 2 USB ports. So we would need 2 USB-A ports available on our computer to keep this connected. So just bear that in mind. And finally, I want to dive into UAD's Apollo Twin. And this is at the higher end of the audio interface spectrum and is renowned for its DSP processing, which allows you to have no latency and to put in the UAD plugins on your recording chain and actually record through those or monitor through those, which we will showcase in a bit. So let's dive into the hardware itself. There's a little bit more to cover here, and then we can dive into the software and we can make some comparisons to some of the other interfaces that we have spoken about so far. And finally here we have our Apollo Twin. And as you can see, this is actually working. This is the interface I'm using to record my vocals. So we have a little bit more to play around with here. We've got our channel 1, and if we press preamp, we can jump between channel 1 and channel 2. And you can see that we have input, we have a low cut here, which is on and engaged. We've got 48 volts phantom power, we have a pad, we have phase invert, and then we have link. We don't necessarily need to worry too much about that right now. Some more advanced functionality here. Then we have monitor, headphones, and monitor, so our speakers, and then we can adjust the volume of each of these like so. And then we have one headphone out here, and then we have one instrument in here. So one fundamental difference that I actually wanted to highlight is that we have to plug this in to mains power. So we have our USB-C Thunderbolt connector here, and then we have this wire that is our power. So we cannot just operate this via USB. We actually need to plug this into mains power as well. And I want to show you the back, but because everything is plugged in, it's a little bit tricky for me to do. But we just have our XLR input and input 1 and input 2. And then we have our monitor output left and right. And then we have our line out here. And then we simply just have a power switch to switch this on and off. So let's dive into UAD console. Now this could look a little bit more daunting. Again, I'm not going to dive into absolutely every feature and nuance here. I'm just going to give you a broad overview so you can see what you're getting yourself into if you decide to look at getting an interface like this. So this is what I'm recording my vocals through, and you can see input 1, we have got our monitoring here, and we have our mic gain here, our 48 volts here, we've got our high cut, and now you can see that we have got some processing here. So I've got some C-Suite Vox here that is attenuating some noise, some ambience. So we're getting more of a direct dry sound. So if I were to turn this off, you will hear that a little bit of noise is introduced and there's a little bit more ambience overall. I personally just like having this more kind of tight, direct sound. So I'm going to turn that back on. We have some compression here with an LA2A, and you can see it's just catching some of the louder parts here and just leveling out my vocal overall. And then we just have a limiter that is bringing up the level of this overall, and that is it. So this is kind of my setting for my voiceover vocals for speaking. And of course, you can see that I have some other stuff going on here, some EQ, some compression. None of this is actually plugged in, but this is for when I'm tracking vocals. So we've got some EQ, CVox again if we need it, some auto tune, some compression, etc. And then we have our sends here, so we can actually send to reverbs and delays. So I've got some reverb here, I've got some reverb here that I sometimes send to when we're recording, and I can just blend that in to taste. And then at the bottom here we have got monitor, so we can adjust all of this stuff in here, or we can do it with the hardware itself. And finally we have record and monitor, so we can actually just monitor through this, or we can record through this. And one is going to print these effects when it's recorded, and the other is just going to record it into your DAW completely dry, but you're going to hear these effects as you're performing it. So it's totally your call to decide whether you want to commit or not. So there's a lot more that we could dive into here. There are whole tutorials that just cover how to use console in more detail, but just to give you a broad overview, this is what console looks like. This is kind of how you can get started using it. And depending on your level of experience watching this, this may give you the information that you need as to whether you want to dive into something that's a little bit more complicated in terms of routing and recording before we get to the DAW itself. So let's take some time to actually listen to how each of these sound. And we've got a few different options that we've gone through. So what I've gone and done is try to make this as accurate and fair as possible. So we had the same proximity, we had the same gain structure as much as we could, bearing in mind that each individual interface is going to react to the signal slightly differently. So we have tried our best to gain match this so we can make some fair comparisons here. So we have got Scarlett 2i2. Let's dive into this first. So you can see we have clean and we have air. So we have the raw version, so it's just going through the Scarlett 2i2, and then we have the air button engaged in the second take. So let's have a listen to the clean take.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet, holding your heart in the darkness, the weight of your chest in my hand.
So we'll just loop the first half of this chorus here so that we can jump quickly through and make some fair A's and B's. So let's have a listen to air.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So I can certainly hear more air there. Let's A and B this.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So I'm going to switch between these as they're playing so that you can hear the difference tonally.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you.
So we have more of a kind of pronounced area here. And if we leave this as is, let's see if the analyzer actually shows us that information.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So we can't actually see that, but I can absolutely hear that there is more perceived air on this vocal, and this is just coming through, right? So we're printing to that. So if you wanted to have an area vocal from the very get-go that suits the emotional tone, the style that you're going for, then you can absolutely go for that. So let's have a listen to the SSL Mark II here.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So that's it, clean, just running through it with no processing. And I've gone ahead and done another take here with the 4K button engaged.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So I'm hearing a little bit more upper mid-range being accentuated. I'm hearing a little bit of dynamic control, so we have a touch more consistency and a little bit more sheen on the top end. So let's jump between the two as we listen. So clean.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So we've got more kind of mid-range here that's being accentuated, or we're perceiving that to be accentuated because we have less of this area here that is being pushed forward for us. Whereas with the 4K engaged, we have...
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
A little bit more brightness, a little bit more upper mid-range presence, which is giving me the perception that the vocal is opening up. There's more presence, there's more brightness, there's more sheen to it overall. So let's have a listen to the 4K against the 2i2 with air engaged.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So I'm definitely hearing some kind of dynamic / harmonic processing here.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So it sounds to me like the mid-range and the dynamics have been untouched. We just have the air that is bringing up the overall kind of brightness on the vocal, particularly in the top end. Whereas with the 4K, there's more that's going on under the hood.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So pay attention to this section here.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
You and me, and we'll listen to that here with the air engaged, and I want you to listen to how consistent that feels in terms of, does it feel like everything is at a relatively equal level and we can hear all of the lyrical content, or do things feel like they're dipping forwards and backwards dynamically?
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So for me, when we get to this section here, we're starting to get a little bit of a karaoke-ish effect where we're going backwards and forwards. It feels as if we're losing level and we have to kind of lean in more to hear what's going on. Whereas there's clearly some kind of dynamics processing under the hood that's happening here. So let's just zone in on this section here.
Silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. Silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So we've got a little bit more of this kind of ducking feeling where we have some more consistency. So this is going to be helpful when you're thinking with the end in mind, right? You want to get a nice consistent vocal, you're hearing all of that lyrical detail, and you're getting a little bit more kind of coloration overall, and you want to commit to that and get something that's closer to the finished product from the very get-go. So let's move on to the Volt. So we have our clean Volt, then we have our Volt with Vox engaged, and then we have our Volt with Vintage engaged. So let's have a listen to this clean.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
Let's listen to it with the vocal compression engaged.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So let's A-B this section again so we can hear the difference in terms of how we're perceiving the lyrical content and the vocal level overall.
Go silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. Go silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So again, we're getting a little bit more of that consistency overall, and I'm hearing a little bit of coloration, a little bit more mid-range energy, which the 1176 is prized for. Not only its fast compression and the kind of sound of that compression, it's also the character that it imparts with its circuitry that can accentuate more of that kind of mid-range energy. And finally, let's listen to Vintage being engaged. So I've taken the vocal compression off. We just have Vintage engaged.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
Listen to that against the Volt with a clean signal.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
Definitely more brightness, more sheen.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you.
Bit more mid-range energy as
When
well.
the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
I'm even going to bring the gain down just a touch to try and match this even more.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So brightness, this has got a lot more low mid information here. So we're just sitting back and listening and analyzing this. And you'll notice so far that these aren't crazy differences. And these are simply just options. They're colors for us to choose on our way in, depending on the emotional intent of the song, depending on the vibe, the character of the vocals, the vocalist you're working with, and the microphone. And it's not a matter of one being better or one being right or wrong. It's just a matter of those options and when they would be suitable depending on the song that you're working on. So let's move on to our duet here. So we have got our entry level, then we've got more of our kind of mid-tier entry level. Now we're moving more into the kind of intermediate to pro level interfaces here. So we've got our duet 3. So let's listen to it clean.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
And then let's listen to our duet 3 with the effects engaged. So I pulled up a preset here and it has compression and EQ on there, and it was a vocal female preset, so I wanted to dial that in, and we got about 3 decibels of gain reduction on there. And let's listen to how this sounds and how different it is.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So we can hear there's a difference dynamically and tonally. It's brighter, there's more air. The air feels a little different to our Scarlett.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's...
So this is a little brighter, a little airier. This is accentuating the same area in terms of the frequency spectrum, but it is a little less pronounced and feels a little smoother to my ears. Is this pretty close in my eyes? The air band with the Duet 3 effects engaged? Yeah, it's pretty close. I personally prefer the Duet 3. I think it's a little smoother, and I feel the air here is kind of edging on when we add processing, potentially being a little harsh, but that's also dependent on the microphone, the vocal, the range that the vocalist is working in as well. So bear that in mind. This is just my opinion based contextually on this vocal, and on another vocalist, I may prefer the air to the Duet with the effects engaged. So let's move on to the Apollo Twin here. So you guessed it, we have got clean and then we have a preamp engaged here. So let's have a listen to it. Clean.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
And then with the preamp engaged.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So I'm getting more mid-range and I'm getting more of that kind of sheen. So we were running through this Neve preamp here. This was the gain here. Nothing else is engaged. We don't have anything else here that should be affecting the tone aside from the drive. So you can see that the color is different because we're now using the unison preamp, where the inner workings of the UAD is changing to emulate how the circuitry of this analog unit would react to the audio. Now, way smarter people than me could actually get into the weeds of what's actually happening here, but it's just essentially imparting a different character, and it's reacting to the audio differently and giving it that iconic kind of sound that these analog hardware units would give when you record in a big studio. So what I want to do is A/B between the Apollo Twin clean and the Scarlett 2i2 clean. So let's first listen to the Scarlett.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So to me, it sounds a little smoother going through the Apollo Twin. Is there much difference? Absolutely not. I'm not hearing something so immeasurably different that it's jumping out at me as something better or worse. So you can make your own conclusions from this, but let's listen to the Scarlett with air engaged and the Apollo Twin preamp engaged.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So this is bringing out a bit more mid-range. There is that sheen, but the sheen is a lot softer and a lot smoother compared to our Scarlett 2i2 air engaged. So let's have a final A/B here between the Volt with vintage engaged here. So this is our UAD Volt against our UAD Apollo Twin with the Neve preamp engaged here. And let's see how different it actually sounds.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
So I'm getting more low mid energy here. This has got less of that, a bit more kind of upper mid range.
When the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet. When the room goes silent, when the room goes silent, it's just you and me in the quiet.
More brightness overall here, and this has more mid-range energy with slightly less sheen. So we're pronouncing more of the mid-range overall. It's more of a kind of warm, smooth sound compared to a kind of more bright and airy sound here. So these do sound different. They certainly are reacting to the audio slightly differently. How much of that is important is up to you to decide. What I have discerned from listening through this is that one, it's dependent on taste. So if you really like bright, airy vocals that have that kind of sheen like the Scarlett 2i2, then that may be great for you. If you want a ton more flexibility and you want to really dial in different nuanced tones and characters of vocals and other instruments, perhaps something like the Apollo Twin is the way to go. If that's not something that you need to concern yourself with, then maybe you can look at one of these other interfaces that give you a little bit of both, something like the SSL or the Volt. My key takeaways are there isn't enough of a difference in and of itself when you are actually recording, particularly when it is clean, to concern yourself with one being superior to the other. For me, the big difference is just flexibility and the level of granularity you can go into how you're processing. So you may be wondering, this is all great, Chris. You've shown us each of the hardware units, you've shown us some of the software, you've played us some examples, but which should I choose? And this really depends on your goals, and it also depends on your life situation. If your goal is simply to record your vocals or your instrument and have that in a DAW so that you can arrange it and make music from it, perhaps something like the Scarlett 2i2 is the best way to go. You've got some really easy functionality here. You don't have to play around with extra software. You just get it in the DAW and you're good to go. If you are someone who's recording vocals day in and day out like myself, and you want to have more control and flexibility over the dynamic control, the EQ profile, getting the singer in the vibe and mood of the song using delays and reverbs for monitoring, perhaps something like the Apogee or the UAD Apollo Twin is a better option for you. Now, these are interfaces that are more advanced and they have more functionality. They also have another layer of complexity because you have the software and there's other stuff that you need to walk through and understand before actually going ahead and just buying these. And what I want to encourage is not to see your favorite producer or artist having an Apollo Twin and going, oh, I must get that, because that's going to be the one thing that gets my music quality or my recording quality to that level, because that simply isn't the case. If you buy one of these and you have a terrible microphone or terrible microphone technique and you're recording it in a terrible room with bad proximity, with poor gain structure, it's going to sound terrible. And what I can guarantee is us professionals could take something like the Scarlett 2i2 and beat out someone who doesn't know the fundamentals of recording, even if they're recording on a $5,000 interface. So we need to understand those concepts first and foremost. And if you're predominantly focusing on vocals, I encourage you to check out our vocal recording course and our vocal production course, where we cover recording in detail. So you can check that out, and that will come on screen now if you want to dive into that after this video. So as long as you are thinking about your own goals and things like portability and your long-term trajectory, those are the things that are going to inform your decision in terms of which one you should approach. So that is it for this video. We've wrapped up these 5 incredible interfaces. And more importantly, I want you to remember that it is the concepts, the understanding of the tools and how to get great recordings that is way more important than any one piece of hardware or software. So with that being said, let us know in the comments what your key takeaways were, and we will see you on the next one.